This summer marks the 100th anniversary of the infamous Scopes monkey trial, and Charles Darwin's theory of evolution is now the rule in public schools across the nation. But is it true? And what does it matter? Find out next on Truths That Transform. The hope of the world is the Church of Jesus Christ. Welcome to Truths That Transform, a production of Coral Ridge Ministries, where we are contending for the faith and proclaiming hope to the nation. I'm Pastor Rob Pacienza. What do you call people who don't know where they came from and don't know where they're going? You call them lost. And that's exactly where we are today as a culture. In 1859, Charles Darwin published his bombshell book entitled On the Origins of the Species. In that book, he established the foundation for the view that all species, including humans, evolved through a purely accidental process called evolution. And the world has never been the same since. This theory is now mandated as the official view in all public schools. But is it true?
Evolution is a scientific theory which holds that life has developed gradually over long periods of time through an unguided, blind process of random mutation and natural selection.
Darwin first proposed this theory, which has been modified and refined over the subsequent century and a half. It is considered to be fact among the scientific establishment, but does it best account for the evidence?
If you look at almost every major field of biology, there are problems and challenges that are raised against the standard evolutionary paradigm.
Indeed, there are massive gaps in evidence that should be present if the Darwinian account of origins is true. For instance, in Darwin's theory, small random gene mutations appear in organisms over time, which confer a survival advantage and are retained and passed down, a process called natural selection. Over millions or even billions of years, Darwin theorized these small changes would multiply and lead to all the variation of biological life we see today. If so, the fossil record would be expected to show very tiny transitional differences over enormous periods of time. But what do the fossils actually show?
The fossils do show us something about the history of life. There's no doubt about it. But do they illustrate Darwinian evolution? Actually, they don't. Darwin himself considered the fossil record a big problem for his theory. Because in his theory, each species turns into a new species by very gradual, small steps. The fossil record doesn't show that.
Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard, one of the foremost paleontologists in the world before his death in 2002, was an avowed evolutionist. But he once noted, the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as the trade secret of paleontology. And the fossil record is only one of the problems for Darwin's account of evolution. Another major difficulty is the overwhelming evidence for design in nature.
In 1859, when Darwin wrote The Origin of Species, we knew very little about what the cell, the simplest unit of biological life, was made of. So you actually have inside cells an information storage, transmission, and processing system that makes life possible. The complexity of what's going on in the cell, and we don't mean complexity in the sense of randomness or a jumble. We mean integrated complexity. We mean informational complexity, like sophisticated machinery and digital code that builds that machinery. That's what's going on inside life, and nobody in the 19th century had an inkling of any of this.
In other words, there is a massive amount of sophisticated, complex information, much like computer code, embedded in the human genome. So, how did it get there? Darwinian scientists face a major problem when they try to explain this as the product of random chance and mutation, as neo-Darwinian theory requires.
Bill Gates has said that DNA is like a software program, only much more complex than any we've ever written. And that's a really suggestive quotation because we know from our experience that computer code comes from programmers. It takes a programmer to make a program. It takes a writer to write a paragraph. It takes a scribe to make an inscription. It takes a broadcaster to convey information across the radio. So information is, in our experience, always the result of a prior mind, the activity of a prior intelligence.
To me, the smoking gun is information in the DNA. Information in DNA, and this is not something that you have to have a scientific PhD to understand. I think it's pretty common sense that information comes from a mind.
When you stop and you think about the complexity of the universe and how everything fits together, and then you look at something like the second law of thermodynamics, entropy, which says that things naturally move toward disorganization. And now you're going to say there's a big explosion and everything comes perfectly organized. I mean, how ridiculous is that? And it goes against all scientific principle.
As a growing number of scientists are discovering, the holes in the fossil record and the presence of complex programming information in our cells points us inexorably toward God.
Design is the most plausible explanation for what we see in life because every aspect of the higher level organization of living systems looks like what you'd expect from an intelligent agent and the opposite of what you'd expect from a blind, undirected process.
For generations, American school children have been taught only one view of origins: evolution, despite its significant gaps as a scientific theory. Even as evidence supporting evolution begins to crumble in the lab, it remains the sole perspective in public school classrooms. This summer, as we mark the 100th anniversary of the Scopes trial, it's clear how far we've strayed from the Judeo-Christian belief that humans are created in God's image, a foundational idea that shaped much of the Western world. This biblical viewpoint, which I recently shared here at Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church, is one we urgently need to reclaim.
Psalm chapter 8, verses 1 through 9. This is the story of creation. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouth of babes and infants you have established strength because of your foes, to still the enemy and the avenger. When I look at your heavens and the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you're mindful of him? The Son of Man that you care for him? You have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the fields, and the birds of the heavens and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the sea. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth, and the grass withers and the flower fades, for the word of our Lord stands forever. Amen. When we read verses 1 and 3 of Psalm 8, David is exalting God, and he's saying, God, your name, your reputation, which is the definition of name in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew, your reputation is one of majesty throughout the earth. Why? Verse 3, because when I look at the heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and stars that you have put in and set in place. You see, David is going out and he's saying, God, you have a name and a reputation that is majestic throughout the earth. And I recognize and praise you for the God who has put everything into being, that has put everything into place. David wants the people of God to rehearse continually that God is God and we are not. You see, all throughout life, humanity has been asking this question: is God king or is man king? And we need the doctrine of creation to remind us that there is one king and you are not him. Nothing caused God. God caused everything. And the doctrine of creation continually reminds us that God is not dependent on anyone or anything. that God is sovereign, that he is the king and we are not. The implications are staggering. It reminds us that if God is king and that this universe revolves around him, it reminds us that there is an absolute being and therefore there is absolute truth. That we don't have to go through life wondering if morality is relative, if truth is just simply a choice in the eye of the beholder. Parents, we would be committing parental malpractice if we were not ingraining this truth in our children, reminding them that this world does not revolve around them, but that this world and all of life revolves around God, that we would be saving our children a tremendous amount of heartache and confusion in life if we teach this principle to our children. But secondly, at creation not only answers the foundational question, where did we come from, but it also answers the question, what is a human being? In verse 4 and 5, David asks the very relevant question. In light of seeing that you have made all things, in light of recognizing that you are sovereign God, he asks the question, what in the world is man, that you are mindful of him? The Son of Man could be translated literally, the Son of Adam. All human beings, that you care for them. And then he says this, verse 5, yet you have made him lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You see, one of the questions that I hear all the time is people wrestling with the question, who am I? What have I become? It's a question of identity. And we need the doctrine of creation to be reminded that our identity is not found in what we do or what we fail to do, that our identity is not defined by this world or by our culture, that our identity is grounded in the beautiful truth that we are created in the image of God. Verse 5 of Psalm 8 takes us back to Genesis 1, verse 26, where the Godhead decides that out of all of the creatures, that it would be humanity that would be the crown jewel, that I will put my image upon them, that they will be created in the very image of God. And so when David reminds us in verse 5 that humanity is crowned with glory and honor, they are words reserved for the king. That is royal language, only reserved for the sovereign. And David is saying, yes, the sovereign God who created all of this, are you ready for your mind to be blown? He has put his mark upon you. Language used for the king. That is where our identity is found. That we can wake up every day understanding the truth that we are not an accident. We are simply not a product of nature, a cosmic accident, but that we are created in the very image of God. Why is this foundational? Because parents, you will one day, and grandparents, send your children off to college, and they will enter into a philosophy classroom, and the philosophy teacher will tell them, your greatest struggle in life is self-esteem. You need to build yourself up. And then they will walk into a biology classroom, and a teacher will tell them that you are absolutely nothing, just a random accident. How do you deal with that? One teacher saying you need to build yourself up with self-esteem, and another professor telling them that they are absolutely nothing. No, the truth for our children and our grandchildren and the next generation is reminding them every day, who are you? You are a child that has been created in the very image of God. So the doctrine of creation answers the foundational question, where did this world come from? What is a human being? But lastly, it answers the foundational question, what is the ultimate purpose in life? It's a good question, because each one of us wakes up every day and asks the question just like Solomon does, is everything meaningless? I mean, it seems like the sun rises and the sun sets. It seems like there is nothing new under the sun. But this is what David says in verses 6, 7, and 8. He says, you have been given dominion over the works of your hands, and you have put all things under his feet. Once again, David is taking us back to Genesis chapter 1. And just as David was taking us back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, verses 6, 7, and 8 take us back to the cultural mandate. In Genesis chapter 1 and 28, we are told to be fruitful and multiply, subdue and have dominion over all the earth. This is the calling of the people of God, to take his royal reputation, the royal reputation of the sovereign God, to the utter ends of the earth. And so we as people, struggling and wrestling not only with identity, but also wrestling with purpose and calling, can rest assured that God has given us a royal calling to take his sacred name to all the earth, to act as co-regents, co-laboring with God the King, to make his name famous over all the earth. Here is the calling of the people of God according to David. Wherever you go, make the sovereign God known. Whatever you do, advance his majestic name. This is why you are here. This is why God has kept you here, to advance his kingdom and spread the glory of God. It is a royal calling for his people, not only born and created as image bearers of God, but called to represent him wherever you go. This is what it means. This is what it means to be alive. This is what it means to be fully human. And without the doctrine of the creation, we will never understand. We will always forget where this world came from and who we are and what our purpose is in life. But here's the foundational problem. After creation, we blew it. You see, in Genesis chapter 3, we said it's not enough. And we chose to live life independent from God. And with that came sin, and the darkness and the brokenness came into our lives and came into our world. You see, it's in Genesis chapter 3 that as image bearers, that image was broken. That image was darkened. That it no longer desired to reflect the glory of God, but it desired to reflect the glory of man. But what would God do for broken image bearers like you and me, men and women who don't feel fully alive? Well, the clue's in verse 4. Look at verse 4 in Psalm 8. It says, "What is man that you're mindful of him, the Son of Man, that you care for him?" That word care in the Hebrew literally means to visit. To care means to visit. How did God show that he cared? Through visiting. Centuries later, God would show us that he cared by visiting us in the flesh, in the person and work of Jesus Christ. And it is in Hebrews, in the New Testament, chapter 2, that we have the largest quotation of Psalm chapter 8. In Hebrews chapter 2, verse 6, this is what the author says. Hebrews 2, verse 6, "It has been testified somewhere, what is man that you're mindful of him, the Son of Man that you care for him? You've made him a little lower than the angels. You've crowned him with glory and honor, putting everything in subjection under his feet." Who is the author of Hebrews referring to? And David ultimately referring to. Look at the next verse. "Now in putting everything in subjection to him, he left nothing outside his control at present. We do not see everything in subjection to him, but we see him for who a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Jesus, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone." It would be centuries later that God would care for his people. Broken image bearers like you and me, he would care for us by sending his Son to visit us. And what happened at the cross is that Jesus took our broken image, and by faith, we take on his image. So that Paul says in Romans chapter 8 that by faith we are being conformed into the very image and likeness of Jesus Christ. This is the gospel. Jesus takes our broken image, and by faith we are conformed to his. If there is no God, then there is no meaning, there is no purpose, there is no inherent value, there is no glorious future. If you have written off God this morning, if you're here or watching online, just be sure you understand what you have written off. to think that we could walk out of here this morning with the good news that we could forever be changed by the glorious truth that there is a God, that there is a God who has created all things. To think that we could wake up tomorrow morning, maybe for the first time, knowing with confidence that this world was not some random explosion and that life is not meaningless. To think that we could wake up tomorrow morning understanding that we have purpose and value because I have been created in the image of God. To think that we could wake up knowing that my life has infinite purpose and a glorious future. It seems too good to be true. But then we realize in Jesus, it's true for us. This is the good news of the gospel and the foundational truths of creation. To know this and to be set free and to be changed forever. Imagine the audacity to leave here this morning and say, God, no thanks. Imagine the audacity of leaving here this morning. Say, God, I'll choose to live life on my own. Sounds absurd, right? Only the fool would say that.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Kennedy Cassidy. As you just heard from Dr. Rob Pacienza, there are 3 foundational questions that all human beings must answer. Where did this world come from? What is a human being? And what is the ultimate purpose of life? The answers to those questions either lead us to truth, to purpose, and to God, or they lead us into chaos. For the past century, the dominant view has grown from the seed planted by Charles Darwin, whose evolutionary theory said that the world is a cosmic accident and that human beings evolved from amoebas with no real purpose except survival. And this denial of God's creation has been disastrous. Did you know that there's a direct connection between Darwin's theory and the horrors of Nazi Germany? Or that the American government forced thousands of people to undergo sterilization because of Darwinism? It's true, and you need to know the facts. Discover this and much more in the book, Evolution's Fatal Fruit, How Darwin's Tree of Life Brought Death to Millions by Tom DeRosa, as our thanks for your generous donation to the work of this ministry. Tom DeRosa himself was a former atheist and evolutionist who came to Christ under my dad's ministry and then saw the biological evidence in its true light. And if you're able to give a generous donation of $50 or more, we'll send you the book, Evolution's Fatal Fruit, plus our powerful documentary program, Chaos, Darwin's Assault on the Image of God, on streaming or DVD. This is truth that many don't want you to see, but the history is undeniable. Darwin's theory dismissed God and opened the door to a series of plagues like eugenics, abortion, which is often driven by racism, and the Nazi atrocities of the Holocaust. You'll see it all documented in this powerful program. The theory of godless evolution is essential to political progressives today and will face attacks for bringing this to light. But the truth is so important that we're willing to withstand it. When you give, you're helping us broaden and extend that gospel ministry of truth to millions of other people around the world. Who knows what future books will be written, nations reached, and strongholds torn down because your gift enabled someone to be transformed by the truth. Please help us to do that by giving a generous donation today and receive the provocative book, Evolution's Fatal Fruit, How Darwin's Tree of Life Brought Death to Millions by Tom DeRosa. And if you can give a generous gift of $50 or more, we'll thank you by sending you the book plus the special program, Chaos, Darwin's Assault on the Image of God, on DVD or via streaming. Simply write to us at Coral Ridge Ministries, Box 11154, Fort Lauderdale, Florida 33339, or call toll-free 877-962-7677, or go online to crm.tv.
A century ago, the Scopes trial of 1925 pushed Darwin's theory of evolution into the spotlight, shaping classrooms and public thought ever since. For generations, school children have been taught that while they can practice their personal faith on Sunday mornings, the so-called scientific fact of the real world, paint a different picture, that we are merely the accidental products of time, chance, and matter. The prevailing view holds that science tells us what's really real, but the truth is not that simple. First, there are compelling scientific reasons to believe that the world and humanity were created by God. Second, much of what passes for science is actually unproven atheistic philosophy dressed up in scientific terms. Take, for example, the renowned biologist Richard Dawkins, who famously said that evolution made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. Notice what he's revealing. His atheism came first, and evolution provided a framework to make it feel more satisfying. In truth, nothing could be less scientific than claiming something comes from nothing. Yet, that's the core of the atheist argument, because any other view of our origins points to a purposeful, intelligent design by a creator God. Atheists have to assert that something sprang from nothing, order emerged from chaos, and life arose from non-life. Ideas that clash with the laws of science and everything we observe. These aren't conclusions drawn from scientific evidence. They stem from a predetermined mindset bent on denying God and then scrambling to justify it. And this worldview has caused immense harm. If humans weren't created by God with purpose, then we're just accidents of nature, as evolutionists teach. And if we're mere accidents, there's no right or wrong, no good or evil, just survival of the fittest. That philosophy fueled the horrors of the Nazi concentration camps and Soviet gulags. Today, it leads people to believe there's no true purpose or design to life, so we can redefine our identities, or even our genders, based on fleeting feelings. When feelings replace God, we see skyrocketing overdose deaths and a surge in what's being called diseases of despair. But when we set down our mental weapons in our battle against God and look with clear eyes, the truth becomes undeniable. This universe, this planet, our bodies, everything around us is fearfully and wonderfully made. Coral Ridge Ministries is contending for the faith and proclaiming hope to the nation. If you're ever in South Florida, we welcome you to join us for Sunday morning worship right here at Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church. Or you can always join us via live stream at crpc.tv. And we want to invite you to connect with us on social media at Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And check out our streaming content at watch.crm.tv. Thank you so much for joining us. And now, here's a look at the next Truths That Transform.
I think there's a general problem with our public schools in a lot of different areas. They're really turning education into propaganda, and especially when it comes to the history of science, that they're giving them bad science.
That's next week. This has been a production of Coral Ridge Ministries.